It's of course incredibly damn common for horror movies to conclude with jaw-dropping plot twists which completely flip the script and change the whole game. A great climactic rug pull can entirely change how audiences perceive the story, characters and movie as a whole, either for better or for worse. What's less common though, is for filmmakers to get bold and deliver an earth-shattering twist right at the start of the story, one which immediately subverts expectations and assures the audience that they're on a different ride than they were expecting. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture here with 10 horror movies that cleverly start with huge twists. Number 10, Bones and All. The marketing for this masterful romantic horror film, Bones and All, was oddly shy about confirming that its star-crossed central characters are in fact cannibals, instead implying them to be mere serial killers. It was evidently a calculated approach by distributor MGM to get more butts in seats, enough that many lured to the film by the presence of Timothée Chalamet were in for a rather grisly surprise in the opening minutes. In the story's establishing scene, we observe teenage girl Maren sneaking out of her house at night to go hang with her friends. A totally ordinary scene for any teenager in a movie, right? Except while laying next to one of her pals, Maren suddenly takes a bite out of her finger, much to the group's collective horror. Maren flees the chaotic scene and returns to her home where her father Frank, evidently having dealt with Maren's cannibalistic urges before, arranges for the pair to skip town, setting the rest of the movie's events in motion. Needless to say, for anyone who thought Bones and All would simply be a Bonnie and Clyde-esque crime flick, watching one of the principal characters suck flesh off her friend's finger made for quite the alarming rug pull. Number 9, A Nightmare on Elm Street. The opening sequence of A Nightmare on Elm Street arguably doesn't get nearly enough credit for how nimbly it toys with audience expectations. Given that the very first character we're introduced to is teenager Tina Gray as she wakes up from a Freddy Krueger-laced nightmare, it certainly feels like she's going to be the movie's protagonist. Yet that all changes a few scenes later when Tina is again terrorized by Freddy in her dreams, this time resulting in her being brutally murdered in her bedroom. At this point, the protagonist role shifts to Tina's friend Nancy Thompson, who becomes the real heroine of not only this movie, but of course the wider Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. It's easy to take this switcheroo for granted today, so many decades removed from the movie's release. For anyone not in the know, it's a genuinely surprising twist on an initial viewing. Number 8, No One Lives. The rather underrated horror thriller No One Lives offers up a trio of gnarly twists in swift succession just 20 minutes in. The movie begins ordinarily enough for the genre, with a couple, Betty and a man known only as Driver, being assailed by a gang of thieves led by the vile Hogue. But once the pair are captured, 3 unexpected events occur. Firstly, Betty kills herself by leaning forward into one of her kidnapper's knives, slashing her own throat. Then, an enraged Driver breaks out of his handcuffs and brutally kills said kidnapper, Ethan, confirming him to be anything but a regular guy. And thirdly, the gang inspects Driver's car and finds a young woman, Emma, kidnapped in the trunk, revealing him to be a serial killer, quite possibly the worst person they could have tried to victimize. Number 7, Martyrs. Martyrs packs more wildness into its first 15 minutes than most horror movies do their entire runtime. The opening scene takes place in 1971 and shows young Lucy escaping from a slaughterhouse where she has been imprisoned before she's placed in an orphanage and makes friends with a fellow resident, Anna. The narrative then leaps forward an entire 15 years, where a seemingly normal family, the Belfonts, are having breakfast on the most regular morning you've ever seen in your life. Except after a few minutes of the family joking around over food, there's a knock at the door, and when the husband answers it, he's promptly blown away by a shotgun blast administered by a now adult Lucy. Lucy enters the house and quickly mows down the rest of the family, including their 2 teenage children, in what's one of the most powerfully disturbing openings to any horror movie, well, ever. It's an epic holy woo moment coming totally out of nowhere in the middle of an otherwise completely banal establishing scene, and immediately leaves the audience desperate to know why Lucy did what she did. Number 6, Landmine Goes Click. Landmine Goes Click may not be a great horror movie overall, but it nevertheless rocks one hell of an enticing premise. When 3 friends go hiking in Georgia, one of them, Chris, ends up accidentally stepping on an armed landmine, leaving his friends Alicia and her fiancé Daniel scrambling to save his life. Except a few minutes after the discovery, any belief that Chris's predicament was a pure accident is quickly dispensed with, as Daniel reveals that he actually planned the whole thing. His motive? Well, he knew that Alicia had recently cheated on him with Chris and devised this scheme to get revenge on the both of them, especially Chris, evidently. It's certainly not the only twist in the movie, but it is an extremely early one that massively flips the script, quickly ridding the story of a central mystery that was totally concealed in the film's trailers. Number 5. Friday the 13th, 2009. 2009's Friday the 13th remake is arguably a teensy bit underappreciated, and in the very least, it quite sensibly avoids being a beat-for-beat remake of the 1980 original, instead serving up a reimagining which incorporates plot elements from the first 4 movies. The film's big early twist, however, occurs when we're introduced to what is apparently the movie's central collective of doomed youngsters as they arrive for a camping trip at Crystal Lake. Except, as it turns out, 4 of the 5 main characters are actually killed off by Jason Voorhees in the movie's opening 20 minutes. At this point, the film leaps forward 6 weeks and focuses on an entirely new set of characters, including Clay, who visits Crystal Lake in search of his sister Whitney, the only character from the prologue who wasn't killed by Jason. It's certainly a clever subversion of expectations for a remake/reboot/whatever that could have just lazily played the hits as a listless retelling of the original. Instead, it at least tried to do something different with the form and function of the series' storytelling. Number 4. Better Watch Out. An aptly seasonal offering now with cult classic Christmas-themed horror Better Watch Out. At first, it appears that the plot involves a babysitter, Ashley, who is tasked with defending the boy she's sitting for, 12-year-old Luke, and his friend Garrett from a murderous home invader. Garrett is apparently shot and killed in the early going, but a few scenes later it's revealed that the intruder is in fact Garrett himself. More to the point, the whole home invasion was a ruse cooked up by Luke and Garrett, with Luke planning to save Ashley from them and win her romantic favour. And this is just the first act of the movie. At this point, Luke knocks Ashley out and the real horror begins as Ashley faces off against a duo of psychotic adolescent boys. The reveal is one of those terrific "we have just lost cabin pressure" twists that ensures audiences have no idea what to expect for the remainder. Number 3. Soft and Quiet. Soft and Quiet is one of those great horror films that throws a bucket of cold water over the audience in the early going, ensuring they will either remain tightly gripped for the remainder or immediately nope out. The film opens by introducing us to kindergarten teacher Emily, who is initially presented as a totally regular, pleasant young woman, even if the scenes that follow progressively suggest that something more uneasy is afoot. Emily heads out into the woods for a clandestine meeting with a group of other white women, and while it initially appears to be as mundane and harmless as any regular PTA/soccer mum meetup, once the meeting begins, it's made abundantly clear what's actually going on. The pie which Emily brought to the meeting, covered in foil up to this point, is revealed to have a swastika carved into the top, before Emily reveals that she's the leader of a newly formed group of white supremacist women. It's a completely left-field yet brilliant attention-grabbing way to open the movie, and one which instantly assures the audience they're not watching any typical horror film. Number 2. What Keeps You Alive. What Keeps You Alive is centered around a married couple, Jackie and Jules, who celebrate their first wedding anniversary at a remote cabin. Ever a solid setup for a horror movie, right? Jules soon learns some unsettling information about Jackie's past relating to the death of a childhood friend, but the couple eventually appear to resolve the issue. However, mere moments later, as Jules stands on the edge of a cliff, Jackie shoves her off, apparently killing her and seemingly confirming her involvement in her aforementioned friend's death. But wait! There's more. Jules actually survived the fall and now has vengeful designs on her duplicitous wife. Now this all occurs just 25 minutes into the movie, providing one hell of a setup for the remainder. If you weren't gripped by that absolutely thrilling, unexpected first act, were you even really watching? Number 1. Cube. Everyone remembers Cube's savage opening scene where a man named Alderson gets diced into meaty chunks by a wire mesh trap. But the film's real opening twist comes a few scenes later. Following Alderson's death, we're introduced to most of the movie's main characters, all of whom wake up trapped in a labyrinth of cube-shaped rooms. Among them is a legendary escape artist renowned for previously flying the coop on 7 prisons, and whose mere presence gives the rest of the group a serious confidence boost in the early going. He certainly seems smart and well-equipped to evade the cube's traps, except just 15 minutes into the movie, he gets caught out by a room rigged with a trap that fires acid into his face, killing him instantly. Seeing the most prepared member of the group get their face melted off in an establishing scene was an ingenious "ooh, things just got real" moment, massively raising the stakes for the remaining survivors and loudly telling the audience that nobody is safe.